They did actually describe me as the first member of the fairer sex to join the city business division in the City of London. When I read that, it put the hairs up on the back of my neck. But of course, I think it was probably meant as a compliment at the time. How times have changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's take it from the top.
From a classroom comment to a career-defining calling, Julie Rees has shaped the commercial property landscape for over 4 decades, from the city to the West End and even across the Atlantic. In this episode, she shares the sliding door moments that shaped her remarkable path, redundancy that became reinvention, a bold cold call in New York that changed everything, and the drive that led her to co-found GN2. Julie's story is full of grit, reinvention, and the kind of wisdom everyone in the property world needs to hear. Julie, welcome to Places She Shapes at Abbey Road Studios. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about Julie as a child.
Well, I had a very happy childhood. I was brought up in a wonderful farm environment in Carmarthenshire, South West Wales, where I lived with my parents and my elder sister. And yeah, it was an idyllic childhood. I went to school locally and then to a comprehensive school all within 5 minutes drive of the farm. So it was, very, very local, very parochial.
Fabulous. And what were you interested in your childhood?
My main interest at the time was really animals, poetry. We were very fortunate in that the farm had a wonderful river. So my entertainment on a Saturday night was to pick up my poetry book and wander through the woods to the river and spend the evening reading poetry in solitude. So yeah, that was the nightlife in Llandilo, Carmarthenshire was not something that was wild at the time. It was pretty quiet.
And then post-school, then what happened?
Post-school, I studied A-levels and decided on a career in surveying.
How did that come about? Because there's an interesting story behind that, isn't there?
Yes, there is. I was determined to do something in business, but I didn't know what shape or form that would take. But I was reading English history and economics at A-level. And we had a new Oxford Don who was the head of history, who all the girls had fallen in love with. And one day he went round the class asking what everybody wanted to do or were going on to read at university. And one of the chaps in the class said he wanted to be a chartered surveyor, which I'd never heard of course, because in those days, in the late 70s, 80s, there were no careers departments in schools, and certainly not in mine. So I took myself off to the library, took out all the prospectuses and decided that's exactly what I wanted to be, and not a desk-bound job. And so I applied to Bristol, got a place and started there in September 1980.
So what was it about the words chartered surveyor that appealed to you?
Well, I think it wasn't so much that. It was the Oxford Don, who was obviously very young, said he'd never known a poor chartered surveyor. And I think that is what suddenly caught my attention. And I thought, yeah, actually that sounds very interesting. But also that it's not a desk-bound job. Being brought up on a farm, in South West Wales, there's lots of coal mining. So, there were plenty of surveyors around with the theodolites, but obviously there are lots of different threads of being a surveyor. Being a chartered surveyor in commercial property in the city is just one very basic strand that you could actually specialise in. So I was fortunate to choose the right one. So, yeah.
Pre that decision, the chartered surveyor decision, you mentioned that you were determined to go into something in business. Was there a reason behind that?
My mother was quite inspirational in as much as that she wanted my sister and I to do something that she hadn't done. And I think she would advise us to study and to travel. And I just had that sort of gut feel that I wanted to do something which would involve being in charge, if you like, or really charting my own path. and not really being, if you like, answerable to anybody really in the long run. But yeah, it just, I felt I want to do something in business, or possibly own my own company, which obviously 40 years later or 30 years later I managed to do.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
So if it hadn't been for that chartered surveyor comment by one of your classmates, could have been a very different path.
Absolutely, totally. It's interesting actually, because out of the group of 7 friends I have, who I'm still very much in contact with, school friends, one became a barrister, another an architect, but the remainder teachers and nurses. So, you know, those professions were very much prevalent, or being a secretary, of course.
Yeah.
Prevalent in the day. It's sort of having a career was something new. And of course, you know, Margaret Thatcher was just in government. She was a very good role model for young women coming through, you know, our longest serving prime minister in the 20th century, and a woman. So, you know, I thought to myself, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And that's, you know, that's what young women need, is that role model to inspire them to go on to greater things.
Yeah, amazing. Tell me about your experience then at university, because perhaps you were in the minority, were you?
Definitely, yeah. There were 50 on my course at the time and 5 girls. So very much in the minority. And of course, being Welsh from a comprehensive school background, the majority of students were public school educated, which put me again in a bit of a minority. But it didn't seem to hamper or put me off at all. It was a challenge. Yeah.
So post-university, what was your first role and how did you identify what you wanted to do?
My first role from university, again, fate had a hand, because I applied, obviously, as everybody did with their CVs, just sent out in a blanket form. And one of those was to Richard Ellis in the city office, another one to a retail agent in the West End, and another to an investment agent. And very, you know, amazingly, I got offered all 3 jobs, but chose to take the Richard Ellis because they were the best known company at the time. And obviously REs then became CBRE. I had no idea at the time what the city market versus the West End market, the difference between them. So yeah, I was, again, yeah, fate definitely had a hand, because I joined them in 1984 and spent the next 8 years with them in the city office and absolutely loved it.
Amazing. Had you been to London a lot
No.
pre-starting that role?
No, absolutely not. We had done a field weekend in London, and my boyfriend at the time he was a surveyor, so he had already moved to London. So obviously I came up to see him occasionally, but I didn't know the market at all. Absolutely not.
It must have been a bit of a culture shock as well, from Wales to London.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'd had Bristol for, you know, a few years in the meantime, but it was a big change, but a challenge, and I loved a challenge.
And there was, I think there was something internally that was put out when you joined that company, wasn't there?
Well, yes, you have to remember that the city market at the time had very few females. I mean, in the whole of agency, there were about 4 ladies in the whole of the city market. And so when I joined CBRE, or Richard Ellis, I was their first female agent to join the company, City Business Division. And they did actually describe me as the first member of the fairer sex to join the City Business Division in the City of London, which, looking back, of course, is when I read that, it put the hairs up on the back of my neck. But of course, I think it was probably meant as a compliment at the time. How times have changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
How did you feel when you read that and had that realisation? Because I'm guessing that you hadn't really thought about it.
I hadn't. I'd forgotten all about it. It was just going through some old papers that I came across it. I mean, I was shocked, of course, reading it today, because, of course, times have changed. And, you know, we are so much more politically correct. At the time, I think, given the circumstances, if you think that Margaret Thatcher was in government, the city office market was a male bastion. I mean, men were still walking around with bowler hats and umbrellas. Having a female presence was completely new. I mean, it was not revolutionary, but certainly I felt like a guinea pig. But it wasn't, in terms of a woman in a man's world, which is very much what I was. The chaps I worked with were all, very polite and very great fun. There was I didn't feel any resistance to my being there. The resistance came more from the secretarial staff, because of course women secretaries, they never had a female professional in the department, and so my work always ended up right at the bottom of the pile. Which is fascinating, really, isn't it, when you think that today, of course, women in property try to promote women, whereas in those days, of course, if you're on the separate side of the fence, they didn't welcome it very much.
That's really interesting.
Yes.
That's really interesting. So talk to me about the challenges of those first 7 years in London.
Well, I mean, they were exciting times. I was very fortunate to have been in the city when it was the deregulation of the stock exchange, with the American brokers coming into London. Planning restrictions were relaxed. You had the birth of Canary Wharf. The city office market obviously was booming. Brand new developments were cropping up everywhere, large floor plates, which is where the demand was from, in terms of American brokers wanting the big open plan floor plates. But of course, come the 90s, all that came to an abrupt stop because, of course, the recession hit very badly and vacancy rates in the city went up to about 22% on brand new office space. So there were far too many agents. And at that point, I'd already been, I started my career in 1984. I was qualified by 1986, and I was an associate partner at Richard Ellis by 1988. I was headhunted then as a director to a small boutique firm in the city. But by 91, the recession was biting. They were taken over by another company, and last in, first out. So my meteoric rise suddenly came to a very abrupt stop. And I was out with 5 other directors on the same day, which was a shock, because I felt gross injustice in the fact that I'd worked so hard to get to that position.
Yeah.
But, I would never have chosen that path. However, 2 months later, I was getting married anyway. We moved to Bedfordshire. And so I had to look at my whole career and decide which direction I was going to go in. Fortunately for me, a lot of old clients came to my rescue, and I had plenty of very good references. And so I accepted a position as the head of a new company, Ryden Sykes, which was a joint venture between Scottish Ryden and a New York-based company, Ryden Sykes International, which meant that I was able to go to New York and base there for certain bursts of time, which meant I became familiar with the New York market and American companies moving over, of course, which was very much prevalent at the time, to the city and to the West End. But I had to learn a new market because by this point we were based in the West End. But again, clients were marvellous and very supportive, and work came in because I had to then start from scratch in terms of finding new work and making the company profitable, which was difficult in a recessionary market, but a great experience. Not one that I would have chosen, but in hindsight was the best thing that happened to me.
So that period of time from being at CBRE, leaving to go to a smaller practice, what made you make that? It was the promotion that made you
promotion leave? Primarily.
Yeah.
My meteoric rise within Richard Ellis had happened very quickly. Richard Ellis was changing quite dramatically, but impatience. I think I was impatient, and I shouldn't have made. Well, it's very easy to say in hindsight I shouldn't have left, but frankly, I was ambitious, and I was offered this great position. And so I thought, well, why not? I wouldn't have chosen to go to anybody else. They had a number of very good clients, superb instructions in the city, i.e. Broadgate, Fleet Place, which were the creme de la creme of instructions to deal with. And that's what that's what I majored in.
So then being then made redundant from that company, you must have had a real sort of 360 look round at what you were doing then, particularly getting married, moving.
Yeah, very much so, because, at that point I could have decided to, call it a day. But it was only because clients and colleagues were constantly trying to get me back in. And when this position came up, it sounded exciting and it got me away from the city. So, and the New York piece, of course, the American piece interested me as well. So it meant a bit of travel.
So can you talk to me a little bit about the difference between the New York market and the London market?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you always think that the New York market is a more advanced market than, well, I always used to think so than the British market. But of course, we had some amazing new developments as a result of the deregulation of the stock exchange. Broadgate, for example, with the large floor plates, and these very large receptions, which were, again, very much based on New York. If you think about the MetLife building, Chrysler building, which is obviously an older example, but their ground floor receptions were absolutely jaw-dropping. I mean, the vast budget that they would spend on their double height receptions, triple height receptions, with all the marble and the escalators and the big lifts, that's where the budget went. When it came to the office accommodation itself, it was all particularly quite boring, and they didn't have the raised floors that we were actually putting into our buildings. All the cables came down the pillars, which was, to my mind, wow, this is as far as advanced as they've become. We seemed that much more advanced. But we did actually, in terms of the receptions, these triple height receptions, and you see it now with new developments, that came from the States. Yeah, the ostentatiousness of these ground floor receptions. Yeah.
So how much time did you spend in New York? You were there.
I spent bursts of time there. So I would say I'd go over and spend 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks there, based at the MetLife building, and setting up meetings with American companies who had British offices to try and, if you like, stimulate an open door for us to walk in through in London, and that actually worked. We had our successes, but it also they loved the British Welsh accent, which was a bit of a novelty for them, and so it was a very positive response. Yeah.
So it feels like there was a kind of what now moment after you were made redundant. What advice would you give to people that are facing a what now decision?
I would say that in every situation where I've met failure, greet it with open arms in many ways. It can be a positive thing because it makes you examine your life and decide if that is the route you really want to continue on. And I'm a great believer that your life is really already plotted out for you. You're just taking that pencil line and just tracing it out. A lot of situations in my life have happened, sort of through coincidence or fate. And I think actually that wouldn't have been part of my strategy, but it's just, that's the way it's turned out. And I feel that, in Confucius's quote, our greatest glory is not in ever falling, but in rising every time we fall. And, greet failure and embrace it and move on.
So there've been a lot of big transitions, redundancy, moving cities, and motherhood as well has had an effect.
Yeah, I mean, I was very intent on my career, and clearly, in the late 90s, early noughties, the large companies were dictated a 5-day week. there was no flexibility. I always say that COVID came 25 years too late for me, in as much as that forced, men and women to realise that actually you can work from home, particularly now with modern technology. But then, of course, that was very much a barrier. And so I had a choice. I could be mother or I could be working. I was, by which point, in Oxfordshire. And so that was a 2.5 hour round commute to London. But again, I was fortunate that some very good clients contacted me and asked me to come back to represent them in the market if they could only see me one day a week, but be able to speak on the phone. So I joined as a consultant. Godfrey Vaughan was a boutique company in the day who were prepared to be more flexible.
Okay.
And interestingly, Richard Ellis had already asked me to go back to them, but I was literally just pregnant and I thought, well, I couldn't do a 5-day week in the city. That I just couldn't juggle all of that, with the demands. So I chose to become a mum and a consultant, which I did for a period of 10 years, in fact. But then Godfrey Vaughan were taken over by Colliers International in 2008. And they invited me to head up their city office, which I then did. And that was the key to get me back in the city, to right a wrong, which had occurred 18 years earlier, which I obviously, I loved, absolutely loved.
Yeah.
Yeah, by which point, of course, my son was that much older. So it was much easier to be able to do that commute and not have the guilty feeling that I should have been at home changing nappies. So
hopefully not still in nappies at 10, so you're all good.
No, you'd hate me for saying that. Oh dear.
So what do you think's helped you navigate these turning points? Because there's lots of them, and I think it's really interesting to understand how you've made those decisions.
I think I've greeted the failures in my life, if I can call them failures, because I think they're opportunities. You have to go with the markets. I never realised it would be recession after such a boom in the city. I never saw that coming. Maybe I was naive, but I just hadn't recognised that, the city market would be boom and bust. And I think, throughout my career, you have to adapt and you have to be flexible. And in the end, you have yourself. You have to rely on yourself. And you can only do so much. So you can only juggle so much. And so, it's not a race. Your career is a marathon. And, trying to get to the top in the shortest amount of time and stay there is not a practical thing to, notion. So I think being adaptable and, in our market, certainly retain that sense of humour. Don't forget your sense of humour.
Retaining those clients as well.
And retaining clients, of course, is very important. Yeah.
Which it sounds like you've done really successfully.
I've certainly tried to, but loyalty is a quality which is, fading fast, I'd say, and has done for a while now. But yeah, I've got some very loyal clients. Very lucky.
You once said you'd always dreamt of starting your own company, and then there was an opportunity with G42.
Yeah, GN2 was set up in 2012, and that happened with the partners of the old Godfrey Vaughan coming back together and deciding that they would come out of Colliers International and set up GN2, which obviously I greeted with open arms because I was very keen to be a founding partner of a company, which we've achieved, and I've achieved that ambition, which I can pat myself on the back for.
Where do you think that seed came from, that you always wanted to have your own?
I think
company?
It's just that feeling of control and being really in charge of your own future. Having the drive to want to nurture something and see it succeed.
Yeah. So can you tell me a bit more about GN2?
Yeah, well, GN2 is, I would say, a multidisciplinary practice, based in the West End. Our main strengths, I suppose, that we are 4 co-owners of the business and directors. So obviously our 30, 40 years of experience is vital, I'd say, in navigating markets which are always complicated by life events or stock markets for supply and demand. And so, yeah, we specialise very much in agency, investment and professional work in the City and the West End. And of course, the market we now operate in is very much one market. It's not that City, Midtown and West End markets that we used to have when, all those years ago. It's with IT and AI, it's becoming just one big market.
And how does that affect you?
It's a positive thing for me. For many years, given the fact that I'd moved from the City to the West End, I had knowledge of both markets. And for a client who is looking potentially for a new headquarters in the City would consider the West End, they don't want to be handed over to somebody else who, you've come to the boundary and now I've got to hand you over to a colleague. It's actually a very useful tool to be able to, have a thorough understanding of both markets, which for a long time I was probably in the minority in terms of being able to offer that service.
Can you tell me a bit more about the Colliers piece?
Yes, of course. Well, once my consultancy position at Godfrey Vaughan, when they were bought out by Colliers International, terminated, I was then offered the position of head of City Office for Colliers International, which was a position I obviously fully embraced because I felt I needed to right a wrong from those years earlier, having left under what I perceived to be a cloud, but of course was an opportunity. And so I was asked to build a new team in the City, and having recruited some young graduates, I then needed to get somebody in with a bit of a name. And I was fortunate enough to that my old boss was just leaving a client role and looking for a position. So we were able to get him into the City office to work with me in the team. There was some resistance in those days, of course, to having a woman being the head of the City office. So yeah, I was met. It wasn't all open arms in the team, but. I have a strong feeling that, leading by example, and my famous Theodore Roosevelt quote is, if you've got them by the balls, their hearts and minds will follow. That was a quote, by the way.
Okay, good. Thanks for clarifying. Love it.
Yeah.
What was in what form did the resistance manifest itself?
I think initially it would have been when obviously my name was put forward. There was a bit of resistance, and also because of course other people felt they were, more deserving of the position potentially than I was, because I'd obviously just joined the company. But it didn't last very long. And once, the company, we got going, and it was still hard times, even in 2008. If you think about the Lehman's bank had just collapsed. And so 2008-9 were still very difficult years. So again, we were building up a new business. Yeah. So having to go back to those old clients and have the support of those old clients during those days was very important.
And how do you go about forming those teams that you're leading? You talked about recruiting graduates and your old boss. How do you help form that team?
Well, clearly having a healthy budget in terms of salaries helped enormously to start with, because we weren't the first stop, that, if you like, to be able to poach people in the market with names was difficult, particularly as we didn't have a book that we already were able to gift to them in order to be able to have a running start. So my first role was really to get some new instructions in, with the team that I had, and we were fortunate that, we were able to get the baby shard as one of our major instructions, and that certainly was, a bit of a honeypot. Then once the team came together, we employed, again, of all men, I'm afraid. There weren't many women in the city that I could choose. But I shouldn't say I'm afraid, because, of course, you employ the best talent, and I would always promote that. So, it's just offering interesting work and leadership, but also having fun. It's very important to forget that while you're there obviously to work, but as we all know now, life is a lot more flexible in terms of being able to work flexibly. In those days, there was a lot of presenteeism, which was, I think, a negative. These days, having a positive attitude to work, having a young team and the energy that they bring is, I find in itself, is so rewarding. I see it with my son now. He's at a large city firm, and the amount of socializing they do between hours is fantastic. It's just the energy. And of course, looking back at my own career, I did the same. When I first came to the city, I couldn't believe that they actually went out for a drink after work. I was thinking, where do they get the energy from? But, within a week I was doing it as well. So I think, London is such a marvellous place to work, Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the mentoring that you've done over the years and the influence that you've had on the people that you've been surrounded by.
Well, I'd like to think this is a positive one. I think I have been quite a hard taskmaster, certainly for some of the people in my team. I've always had very high, if you like, expectations, and demanded quite a bit from them. But in terms of mentoring, I think there's nothing more rewarding than being able to pass on your experience to somebody who's younger and coming into the profession, and being able to assist them and help them on their journey. And if I can make that any easier or more interesting and fun, then I think I've fulfilled that brief.
You obviously made it sound interesting. Your son's followed you into the...
Yes, I think, but it's because I've enjoyed my career. There hasn't been one day that I haven't wanted to get out of bed to get into the office, or to see my colleagues, or to do a deal. And that doing a deal piece is the adrenaline that keeps you going.
Yeah. And can you tell me a bit more about how you retain your clients and how you've managed to keep that real loyalty with your clients?
I think that is purely communication. It's very easy these days just to drop a text or an email and not pick up the phone. I'm a great believer in speaking to people and communicating and having a coffee. And that's what I've always done with my clients. And when it's come to negotiating deals, I like to sit down with the person I'm dealing with, and like we're doing, staring each other in the eye, and being able to read the body language in a negotiation. And I think the communication is so important. And I think clients appreciate that, because just dropping a text or an email now and again is not communicating in the way that I like to communicate.
So have you tried to pass that down to the teams that you've worked with?
Yes, I always do. It's always interested me actually how new grads coming through are always loath to pick the phone up to talk to people. If you give them an exercise to do and ask them to check on details, they'll always resort to to the computer and to a program rather than pick the phone up to speak to agents in the market. It's just foreign, really. But that's not to say, it's the wrong thing, but it's not the right thing in my book.
Yeah.
But then I'm old-fashioned, maybe.
I don't think so at all. So I've got some shaping moments questions. As you know, the podcast is called Places She Shapes. Mm-hmm. So what's one tool, resource or item that you must have in your workspace that allows you to do your best work?
I would say that would be my sense of humour. I don't think you can succeed without a sense of humour, particularly a woman in a man's world. You need to develop a thick skin, but retain your sense of humour.
Why in particular is that important for a woman in a man's world?
Well, partly because if you're sensitive and you take every comment to heart, then you're not going to be long for this market, because we are still a minority in a man's world. Even though the number of ladies coming into the profession these days are much greater, you still have very few making it to the top. And that's partly because of the work-life balance. And I think the demands on women, particularly with children, and also the way that remuneration works, of course, because at the end of the day, if a man is there 5 days a week and a woman is in and out and not perceived to be putting in the hours, then you're not going to be rewarded. So it's a tricky path to navigate. And it's tricky for women because, of course, unless you're in a position of seniority, you can't dictate that your terms. You're obviously accepting them from above. And that's not always in your favour. And particularly if you're commuting, if you have children commuting, you have to have the backup, but you also have to have remuneration to be able to do that. And an understanding boss or understanding team.
Looking back, is there a place, a room, a building or a city where you found your voice or realised your potential as a leader, even if you didn't fully recognise it at the time? I
think it was the city, my first job in the city. It was just amazing. I just, suddenly thought, wow, where am I? I got over that imposter syndrome fairly quickly, and suddenly thought, I found my voice here, and this is me.
You don't feel like somebody that's ever had imposter syndrome. Is that true, or you just...
When I first started, I think I did. I used to think, well, why? I was told that they'd had 100 CVs in for the post in the city office, and they'd interviewed 15, and they'd narrowed that down to 2. And I was one of those lucky 2. And the only reason I think I managed to get the offer of the job is that the competition was the son of the sort of senior partner's friend at the time, but he then accepted a job elsewhere, and so I got offered the job. So I was thinking, yes, amazing. But in those days, you were asked to send a photograph in with your CV, because it's slightly done differently these days, of course, because you've got the HR departments running the whole show. But in those days, it was effectively, does your face fit? And if your face actually fitted the bill, then you owned it.
I've got a 7-year-old at home whose job title changes every day and what he wants to do when he's older. If you'd had a job title when you were 7, what would it have been, and how does it connect to the woman that you are today?
Oh, absolutely nothing, I suppose, and no connection whatsoever. I would have probably chosen to be a school teacher.
Would you?
Yeah. But, again, that was the choices that were available to you or talked about in the day. You would have been a school teacher, a nurse, or maybe a secretary. Senior positions were not really promoted for women, which is why I was saying, having, I suppose, the first female prime minister was a great role model for women of, like me coming through in the sort of late 90s, 80s.
You mentioned your mum was keen for you to have a career. What did she do? What did your parents do?
Well, my parents were farmers. And so my mother was very much involved in the farm, which is why my love of animals, it would have been something animal related or school teacher. But and she had ambitions for myself and my sister, and gave us the time and the energy and the direction to study and travel. And that was her mantra, don't get tired of the kitchen sink. And so I took direction from her. I don't think she knew what a child surveyor was when I mentioned I was going to be a child surveyor. But, they've thoroughly, sort of backed me in my decision. They never, obviously, I never regretted it. So they were quite happy to see me happy. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Julie, thank you so much.
That's a pleasure.
It's been great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take it from the top.